One of the things that I learned is there's a huge difference between beef and pig, and there's a huge difference between venison and game animals than either one of those. I very much disagree with a lot of these masterclass videos, professionals out there, and how they're processing venison and bear for that matter. A lot of them cut it up exactly the same way as they would beef or pork. Not appropriate. There's really only one cut, maybe two on venison that you could do the same as beef or pork, and that would be the tenderloins and the loins, the back straps. So, but other than that, not the same. You're not going to get the same result from making a tomahawk steak out of beef if you try to do that with the venison. It is not going to come out the same. You're going to be really disappointed with your venison. My objective with this series is to help some of the newer people to this sport, or people that have a basic understanding, learn a little bit more about how I do it and where I've had success, and help them develop their own process that works best for them and their family. I'm not a super expert on this. I'm still learning all the time. My name is Timothy Broche. I have a passion for the outdoors, family, and cooking. I embrace my primal instinct to hunt and gather. I understand how it defines me and appreciate the unparalleled food the outdoors provide. The water and woods call to me. This video is an introduction to processing deer. And make no mistake, it takes a lot of time. There's a lot of little things. If you want this to really come out to where you'd be happy to serve this to your friends and your neighbors and your best guests, and absolutely have none left over at the end of the year where your family's looking forward to eating it, it's a lot of work. You're looking at probably anywhere from 6 to 8 hours to completely process an animal, depending on your skill level and how you're processing. And that doesn't include making sausage or burger or any of that. So it is a fairly substantial time commitment. This is going to be a series of videos. So each video today is just an introduction to some of the things that you'll need to be a little bit better prepared when you start into this. But it's going to be a series of several videos over the next couple months, breaking down each piece, as well as some of the recipes that will go with the different ways to break down each piece of meat, all the way from how to take it off the animal in the field, once you get it home, what to do with it, how to store it. Home, getting ready to put this stuff in the fridge downstairs. I don't have time to work on it today, but I'm not going to leave it in the game bags. It's good for it to air out and cool off initially, but if you leave it in the game bags, the outside of the meat's going to dry a lot. So I'm just going to put it in garbage bags. I'll throw it in the fridge downstairs, let it rest for a couple days until I have time to work on it. As far as letting the meat kind of rest after I get home, I do think there's some value in not processing or freezing it right away. In my experience with this, I would never leave it hang, until there's mold on it or whatever. The meat starts drying out. Like, you just waste so much when you do that. And I don't think it makes a lot of difference. But I do believe there's some value in letting it rest. I find to let the meat relax and just kind of air out a little bit, about 5 to 6 days in those plastic bags in the fridge are just about ideal. The meat comes out so much more tender. Keeping it in the plastic bags, it keeps it moist. It doesn't dry out on the outside. You don't lose any meat. It's easy to clean. But about 4 to 6 days in plastic bags, just resting, seems to work best for us. Having a spare fridge, oh, somebody put beer in my fridge, is absolutely amazing. It's almost a necessity, and I keep, this is the meat that I got out of the woods last weekend. I took it out of the game bags and put it in plastic bags, so it just keeps it from drying out. If you leave it in the game bags, you're going to have to trim probably 1/4 of an inch off of the outside of the meat. It's all going to be dried out. Putting it in the plastic bag still lets the meat somewhat breathe, but it keeps it from drying out, makes it much easier to deal with and clean as you're processing. But if you get multiple animals, like sometimes I get a bear and a deer in the fall at the same time, being able to put one in the freezer and put one in the fridge while you're working on it, because if you don't have time to do it all in one day, you don't want to be trying to time it out and take meat out of the freezer and let a quarter thaw out, and then maybe it's not thawed out and you have to wait. It's just a pain. So If you have the space and the ability to have a spare fridge, it really, really makes it a lot better, especially when you're starting to mix sausage and burger and stuff where you need to let it rest for 24 hours before you complete it. You can throw it in the spare fridge. Just really will streamline and speed up the entire process having that extra fridge. As far as storing your meat, upright freezers are by far the most amazing. You can keep things much more organized. You can keep your different meats sorted out. You can find what you're looking for. They're just absolutely amazing. So if you're getting ready to upgrade a freezer for game meat or anything else, I would strongly recommend an upright freezer. As much as I love my upright freezer, chest freezers have their place as well. So if you have to freeze quarters, oh, look at that. Bigger things that you don't want or don't fit in the freezer. These chest freezers work amazing. They work well for storing larger amounts of other stuff too, but I use this one if I'm doing any taxidermy work. It's great. I can throw the hide in a bag and throw it in here. This buck that I killed, it's got kind of a cool little antler on one side, little 3-point. I'm going to do a European mount on this later. Might do a video on that. It's pretty simple. You just boil it until the meat falls off. But chest freezers, very handy and do have their place. When you get to your cutting station or in the kitchen, when you're ready to start cutting stuff up, a good cutting board, decent sized cutting board. This one's not huge, but it's big enough to get a hind quarter on. Very important. Do not use glass ones. As you use a glass one, they're super hard. And if you need to push down on the cutting board with the knife to cut through something, you're going to spend a lot of time sharpening your knife. Glass cutting boards will dull knives fast, crazy fast. As far as knife goes, these are my choice. They're nothing fancy. They're just part of a kitchen set. But these knives hold an edge really good. They're easy to sharpen. They got nice little points on them for doing some of the finer work and taking the meat apart. This one works great. It's got a nice firm stiff blade, so if I'm cutting steaks or bigger chunks of meat, it helps get a much straighter cut. Cutting steaks out of the top and bottom rounds or whatever. But just find something that works well for you that you find. I like the ergonomic grip on these. And again, they hold an edge beautifully and they sharpen up nicely. So this is just kind of whatever works for you. But a couple of things, a smaller knife and a bigger one with stiffer blades that sharpen up easy and hold an edge were the key things. And that they fit your hand nicely too, because you're going to be holding on to these things for hours on end, cleaning up these game animals. Also, do yourself a huge favor and be able to sharpen your own knife. There's a lot of different ways to use this. You can sharpen knives with steel. There's a lot of different kinds of these little hand sharpeners. I prefer the stone. I've been using a stone since I was old enough to hold a knife and sharpen it. This is not, I suppose you can use these wet or dry, but it's got a course on the back and line on the one side. You can see which side gets used more, but these kitchen knives that I'm using for cutting up meat, they sharpen up beautifully on the stone, and you really need to keep your knife very, very sharp. It'll make all of this work much, much easier. So again, do yourself a favor. Learn how to sharpen your knives if you don't, or if you do, keep them sharp. Another piece of somewhat critical equipment is a vacuum sealer to prep the meat for storage. Vacuum sealing is going to keep your meat fresh way longer than any other method that I know of to freeze your venison or bear or whatever you're doing. This set of scales is always helpful just to portion out some of the meat like burger or different cuts so you don't end up with a ton of leftovers and things getting left in the fridge or fed to the dogs or wasted. We always portion them out. There's 3 of us and a little bit of leftovers, so portion sizes are around 1 pound per meal. Some of the suggestions for equipment and extra refrigerators and tools and saws and all that kind of stuff are just suggestions. I've been processing my own meat for over 15 years. And when we first started, I didn't have any of that. I had a small meat grinder, cutting board, couple sharp knives, and some little bins that we would cover with tin foil or saran wrap and make room in the fridge to store the meat while we're processing it. We've always had a chest freezer. Pretty tough to do anything without a freezer in this case, and you needed to finish the process storing the meat. So, but you don't need to have all this stuff. One of the other things I think is very, very important is to mark what's in the packages. You're likely going to get burger pieces off of every single piece of meat that you process through this entire workload. You don't need to be over particular with cleaning the burger pieces up. One of the things you do need to be careful of, two things: make sure you get all the hair off of every single piece. The other thing is you cannot leave any of the natural fat on these chunks of meat. A little bit of the connective tissue and silver skin is fine, but do not leave any of the fat on here. On some of the cuts, like the neck, the shanks, and the ribs, again, you don't have to be over particular with getting all of the silver skin and connective tissue off. In most cases, these pieces are going to be cooked in the pressure cooker. Under pressure, under heat, will cook a lot of that connective tissue and silver skin right off. And it does save a little bit of processing time, not having to be over meticulous with getting the silver skin off these. The majority of your time is going to be spent getting silver skin and connective tissue out from between the layers of the meat, so that these pieces of meat are very flavorful, they're very tender. You don't have this tough, chewy connective tissue and silver skin on here. In this video, I'm just running the knife in between two muscle groups along silver skin. If you get the angle of the blade just right, you can peel a layer of meat right back off of the layer of silver skin, and then stick your knife underneath the layer of silver skin, tip it up towards the silver skin, and just nice and slowly and gently you can slice that right off. In this case, this is a fairly heavy piece of silver skin. It comes off quite easy. Some of the other ones are fairly thin. You don't need to get too meticulous with this, but anything that looks really white really should come off. There's going to be a few layers of thin silver skin in between some of the cuts that we take off this, which is not too problematic, but these heavier, thicker pieces of silver skin really need to come out of these. When you're trying to get the silver skin off with some of these smaller pieces, one of the things you can do is kind of get it started on the thicker end, and then flip it so the silver skin is down onto the cutting board. Hold on to the silver skin and then tip your knife blade just as you've got it in between the meat and the silver skin. Tip the sharp edge of the knife down towards the cutting board a little bit, and you can run that right in between the meat and the silver skin and not leave any meat on the silver skin. You can't do it with all of the cuts just because of the shape or the size of them sometimes, but with some of the more medium or smaller pieces, this technique for getting the silver skin off works very, very well, and it'll save a ton of time once you get proficient at it. We're going to completely debone this in most cases outside of the shank and the ribs and the neck. But one of the things as you're doing this and you're taking these chunks apart and you're getting it off the bone is just take a little bit of time and care and clean it up properly. So along the way, as I'm processing this, all the burger pieces that get set aside, I'll just vacuum seal these up as I go through processing some of this, and then put it all in one place in the freezer, and then just do all the burger at one time. It saves a lot of time that way. You're not cleaning your processing equipment 6 times to do 6 different batches of burger. So but one of the ways just to consolidate time. The next video in this series, I'll show you how to process venison heart, liver, and the tenderloins, and making all that into a meal.